Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Greg Inks. I am the Cloud Practice Lead for AKA, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking to you about what is Azure and what is the cloud. The goal of this webinar is to cover off on more of the practical business and technical definitions about what is Azure and the cloud. This is not meant to replace any of the online trainings or coursework that is available from Microsoft on the subject. So should you be interested in getting certified or a deeper understanding, please refer to those resources to give you a little bit more information. But today what we're really going to focus on is an overview of what is Azure. We're going to talk a little bit about Azure as a technology, the offering from Microsoft. We'll spend a little time just talking through sort of what is a cloud and what does it mean in terms of data centers and servers. There's a lot of myths and some false information out there about cloud technology versus traditional data centers, and I just want to kind of try to spend a little bit of time talking about from a demystifying what is the cloud perspective. We'll cover off on some of the primary technology jargon acronyms that you'll have out there, such as IaaS and PaaS, and spend a little bit of time kind of talking through what those acronyms are, what the differences are, and help you understand what the pros and cons are of each type of technology. We'll talk a little bit about the business benefits to you, our customer base, and what you can expect to achieve by leveraging cloud technology. And we've gotten a lot of questions about what is the commercial cloud versus the government cloud. This is specifically to address questions from our public sector audience that wanted to know a little bit more about what is the government cloud and how does that differentiate itself from commercially available Azure. Then we'll spend a little bit of time talking through the Azure subscription concepts. What is an account? What is a subscription? How do you price Azure? How do you invoice Azure? How do you get charged for Azure? And talk a little bit about the economics associated to the cloud. So why don't I go ahead and get started. First, we'll start off with the overview of Azure. Okay, what is Azure? Well, if you look it up on Google or on Wikipedia, you'll get a quick little definition that it's an actual color. I don't know if Microsoft thought about this at the time, but if you ever happen to notice, blue happens to be a primary color that Microsoft uses quite a bit. So the concept of calling their cloud Azure makes sense with their color schemes. It also typically gets referred to as a small butterfly, typically blue in color. I didn't know that. I thought that was an interesting thing. So if you ever happen to see somebody talk about a particular butterfly called Azure, you know what they're referring to. But the real definition of what is Azure, if you were to refer to Microsoft, is that it's a collection of cloud services. First and foremost, there isn't one thing that represents Azure. Azure is a collection of close to 500 plus services, growing daily, of capabilities and software products that Microsoft makes available on the cloud to give business capability that you may otherwise not be able to do on your own without a tremendous amount of investment. It provides software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service, which basically means that you can leverage Azure to do a number of technology solutions, ranging anywhere from hosting your laptop in the cloud if you're running a server OS or an application on your laptop that you wanted to share with multiple resources, or quite frankly, if you just wanted to get rid of your laptop or get rid of your server and put something somewhere else and still run that application and make it available. Or if you go all the way to software as a service, it's a type of software that has been made available by Microsoft where they take care of all of the hardware, infrastructure, security, and networking and just make it so that it's readily available to you in like a web browser where you can use their software via that web browser and take advantage of the capability. With Azure, you really get the freedom to kind of do whatever makes the most sense for your business, whether it's building and deploying an application from scratch, or if you're trying to take an application and stick it in the cloud because you don't want to spend a tremendous amount of money on servers. It gives you the framework and the applications to make that happen. In terms of, well, what does that really mean from a Microsoft perspective and a data center? Where is Azure? Well, Azure's everywhere. Microsoft has probably one of the largest data center footprints in the world of all of the cloud providers, in that they have data centers in almost every geography and in almost every continent. And where you see spaces that are gray, chances are they have somewhere on their product roadmap of where they're going to put it. Said slightly differently, this is a huge investment for Microsoft, and really, quite frankly, it's one of the only types of companies, Microsoft that is, that has the money and the sheer force of will to make this happen. If you think about just operating a traditional data center for your local company or for your division or whatever makes the most sense, just supplying the servers themselves is one cost, but then the power associated to it, the heating and cooling and air conditioning, the lights on, keeping that data center controlled, securing it, making sure access is taken care of. Those are some of the types of concepts that every customer that has some footprint of infrastructure has to keep in mind when they're trying to do this. But Microsoft is doing it on such a scale, and quite frankly, at such a security standpoint, that they have to do that for hundreds, if not thousands, of servers in a single building. So when you start to look at the 28 regions that they have all over the planet, you can start to think of the massive undertaking that Microsoft has done to try to control this. Another thing that you can kind of think about when you look at this is that this is a $15 billion investment and growing. And that number is dated here in the earlier part of 2017. So chances are that number has gone up pretty significantly since then. So if you think about what you would do in a traditional on-premise environment where you're hosting applications and servers, Microsoft has got such an over-investment in this that I don't think that there's any customer on the planet that could potentially compete for their own purposes and take advantage of that type of scale. Speaking about scale, if you really think about it, one of the main differentiators for Microsoft is their strategy of how they're trying to get cloud available for their customers. So while everybody talks about the public cloud as Azure, or public cloud as the only way to be able to leverage cloud technologies, it is certainly Microsoft's #1 footprint, but it's not their only. Microsoft recently just released a product called Azure Stack that allows for you to take advantage of the same technology that's powering these data centers and bring it to your on-premise data center. So in essence, you can be running your own mini cloud inside of your rack and data center, taking advantage of all of the capabilities that Azure has from a software and cloud service perspective. So it just gives you a little bit of an idea of the type of investment that Microsoft is making. When we talk about Azure and the cloud services, this is a bit of an eye chart, but it really does kind of give you a better sense of what are we talking about and how big is this. So if you look at it from a layer perspective, at the very bottom you see the data center infrastructure. This is really your traditional hardware. The cloud is really just servers running in somebody else's data center that are being care and fed by a cloud provider like Microsoft, with a tremendous amount of automation and resiliency built into the solution. So said slightly differently, when you as a customer potentially build a software product and an infrastructure footprint in your data center, you're responsible for all of the hardware, all of the power, the racking and stacking of those boxes. When you take advantage of Azure from Microsoft, they're handling all of the racking and stacking of boxes, all of the power management and distribution of those kind of servers. So should a server go bad, they simply move your workload from one server to another and fire you back up. You don't have to worry about the headache of moving those virtual machines around or the headache of moving those workloads around. Azure is going to take care of that sort of thing for you. As you start to look up the stack, Microsoft then provides services as you move up from bottom to top of the picture. So across the next layer where you see infrastructure services, this is where Microsoft is starting to develop infrastructure services that are really built on top of their virtualization infrastructure. So this would be things like operating systems and virtual machines. You have the ability to stand up a virtual machine from scratch via these infrastructure services where you say, I want a flavor of Windows Server 2016 Data Center Edition, and on top of that I want SQL Server running. Through a couple of quick clicks you can have a VM deployed out into Azure within seconds or minutes, depending upon how big the workload is that you've asked the cloud to go build. Or you can bring your own virtual machine. So should you have a physical or virtual machine running in your data center, you can use Azure's services to take that machine and bring it up to the cloud and leverage their data infrastructure and keep running as though you were on your on-prem environment. And that's just one set of infrastructure services. If you look across this picture, you can see there's quite a few of them, and quite frankly, they're growing every day. To get the most latest and up-to-date list of all of the services and capabilities available, you would have to go to azure.com and go find the full list. But they offer capabilities around storage, capabilities around networking, intrusion detection, security prevention, authorization and authentication, all those types of traditional infrastructure services we want. As we move further up the stack, you start to see the envelope around platform services. And what this is it's really Microsoft's investment in software on top of all of their cloud. So things like, and I'll just pull one out, web applications. Almost everybody today is familiar with websites. You can use Azure to host your website in Platform as a Service, whereby your website is running and maintained by Microsoft. It's maintaining the web server that's running your website, all of the connective tissue, that web server sitting inside of an operating system, sitting inside of a virtual machine. So should you have a web application or a website that you want to run, Microsoft can literally take the top-down slice through the stack and manage that website for you, where all you need to do is put your website there and click run, and your website's up and available and configured for the internet. And there's a tremendous number of services here. I could go into depth in any one of these capabilities, but for purposes of this conversation, I'm going to kind of leave it at that and let you have a bit of a think of just the scale and by which Microsoft is deploying. Now, I used a couple of acronyms there, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. What exactly are these, and what do they mean, and why should we be interested? Well, quite frankly, they're the kinds of acronyms or technology choices that you need to make, or your IT department needs to make before you go into the cloud. If we're talking infrastructure as a service, this is really the closest analog that we have to data centers that our customers and everyone that has been doing this type of cloud work since the late 90s, early 2000s have been involved in. Basically, it's a virtualized hardware platform where you can build any landscape, any environment, bringing any operating system onto hardware that you don't own. So you can define the operating system, what type of software is sitting in that operating system, and the approximate running characteristics of it. So you can say, I want a virtual machine that has 8 cores, 64 gigs of RAM. I want it to have a terabyte worth of native C drive disk storage, and attach a slew of other disks and add another 3 or 4 terabytes of additional storage to the virtual machine. So in the same way that you can configure a physical server, you can configure these virtualized hardware instances in the cloud. It can support any x86 hardware system, which means your traditional Intel-based, Windows-based types of solutions. Sorry for those of you out there that are mainframe fans. Mainframe, unfortunately, is not currently available in Azure. Maybe someday they'll think about building that into the cloud, but at present it's all x86 infrastructure. You can build it from scratch, or you can move it from on-prem through some lift and shift capabilities. To put it into an analogy, I'm going to use baseball. It's like you have a field that somebody went ahead and plowed for you, made it nice and flat and level, put green grass out there, and you really just have a raw field. Microsoft is really saying, you've got this blank slate, and we have a set of infrastructure, a set of equipment that you can bring and go build whatever sporting event you want to on that field. So if you're into baseball, they've got the bases, they've got the dugouts, they've got bats and balls, you name it. They have all of the things that you need to go out and build that baseball field, but it's up to you to design it. Or if you would like to change that field and make it into a soccer field, they have the nets, the goals, the lines, and all that kind of good stuff. The point is, you are the one that has to set it up, or your partner, and has to build that application or that infrastructure landscape to meet your needs. Platform as a service is a little different in that this is where there's common application services that were constructed by Microsoft and made available to you. So things like web applications, where I can put a website in there, have it hosted, and all of the underlying pinnings that would be necessary to run a website. Or flip it around, if you're looking at something like a search capability, and I want to build a native search, and I'm looking for a search service that will let me index content, make it queryable, allow a person to have some type ahead in a text box where they can type in BA and it starts to bring up BAT or base or any number of words that start with BA. That type of capability is a platform as a service, cloud service that Microsoft makes available. The other thing that's different about platform as a service is that it's self-healing, it's auto-scaling, it's self-provisioning. So when you talk about infrastructure, you have to go build that VM. And if you want to have 2 VMs that are operating in an active way as in a cluster, you have to configure that yourself. In Platform as a Service, that type of need is taken away from you. You simply put your website out there and tell it how much you're willing to spend. So if you know that you're receiving 10 clicks a second, you're probably going with a small instance or a small configuration of the website. If you select it to be auto-scaling, as your traffic goes up, the cloud just automatically scales for you. This is pretty interesting when you think about things like the Super Bowl. Most websites undergo a significant amount of participation or web traffic if they've run an ad on the Super Bowl. I've known companies in the past that have actually gone down and their website has crashed because of running an ad on the Super Bowl, and their web servers couldn't keep up with it. With Platform as a Service, the cloud is going to scale that up and prevent your website from going down. It handles spikes in traffic, but it also shrinks. So should you have oversized this and set it up to handle 1,000 clicks per second, and let's just say for whatever reason your website's not popular anymore, I'm sorry to hear that, what it's going to do is it's going to scale down for you and not charge you for such a large footprint because it's not needed. You're not managing the hardware, it's handling it for you. In the same sort of baseball analogy, this is like where you decide what type of sporting event you want to go play, and you go find the field that's there or find the cloud service that you want to use. So if you're in the mood to play baseball, you find a baseball field. You show up and you play. You don't have to set up anything. You're not bringing anything with you. The bases are already there. The batting cages are already there. The dugouts are already there. You sit down and you play. Now, you have to live within a little bit of those constraints. The size of the field, the distance of the bases, you can't really change that. They were there, they were set up, and if you change it, you're breaking the rules and you're kicked off the field. It's the same way with Platform as a Service. You have to take it the way that it was given to you. You don't get a lot of configurability or a lot of changing for the basic functions of what it is. So if you decide you don't want to play baseball anymore and you want to play soccer, you got to go find a different field. Just like in Platform as a Service, you got to go find a different service. Now the last type is Software as a Service. What this is it's the ultimate solution where a full end-to-end system has been built and deployed for you. So in other words, you don't have to do anything. You just simply say, I want email. If you look at Office 365 and Exchange Online, you can sign up for email directly with that, and you're provided with an email account and an email mailbox. You pay for how much storage you have and how many emails you have, but all of the capability, all of the software, and all the configuration is made available to you as a software, as a product, with no need to manage the application and no need to manage the infrastructure. The flip side of this is it's very controlled. You really don't get to modify it very much. Other than a few customization or configuration options, you can't really make adjustments to it, and you shouldn't have to. It's software as a service. So there's no hardware, no software to manage. And in that same analogy, it's just like I want to play baseball, but I don't have a team, I don't have a field, I don't want to get in a car, and I don't want to drive anywhere. I don't want to pick anything. I just want to sit down and play. So spin up your Xbox, sit down, grab a controller, and start playing baseball from the comfort of your home. You can have a headset on. You can be looking at the baseball game, participating, or put it into auto mode and just watch the baseball game play in front of you. The point is, you're not physically in control of anything other than the character that you're playing, living by the rules of the game. Now, some might say, well, why would I want to do this? You know, I'm really comfortable with my hardware on premise. It works really well for me. Why would I want to move to the cloud? Well, quite frankly, you can operationally reduce your costs. So because this is a self-service, it's self-provisioning, it's extensive, you can automate it, you can really get it to the point where you only pay for what you use. So in a lot of solutions and systems, companies have gone and bought 2x the number of servers so that they have high availability. When you're using the cloud, when it's been orchestrated and configured to take advantage of cloud technologies, you might be able to cut your infrastructure footprint in half. Now that's an extreme example, but those are cases that do exist inside of the cloud. What's said more differently, when you're using something on premise, you paid for the hardware, it's sitting on your shelf, it's got power, and you're paying for it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whereas with the cloud, you can pay for things on demand. You only pay for what you use. So if you're running that server 1 day a week, you only pay for 1 day a week. You don't pay for it for the full year. So that's the kind of concepts that you can have that really help you operationally reduce your costs by only paying for what you actually need to use. The other benefit is really the reduced time and deployment services. Everybody remembers the days where, the business asks IT, hey, I want to go and build XYZ application. I just bought it. Please install it. And IT says that'll be 6 months. What? 6 months? Well, yeah, they had to go and buy hardware. It's got to get shipped in. They got to go find rack space. They got to put that hardware on the rack. Then they got to configure it. They got to secure it and provision it. Once that's all done, then they have to load the application. Once that's all done, they got to test it. Once that's done, they hand you the keys, and it's 6 months later, and you said, I forgot what it was that I wanted to install. Whereas with the cloud, really you go into Azure and you say, I'll take 3 of these, 2 of these, 1 of these, click a couple buttons, and 15 minutes later, your environment's ready for you. It's good to go. You improve your efficiency and reliability because Microsoft is handling the infrastructure and the data center for you. You're following standardized pooled resources. There's high availability configurations right out of the box. So said differently, as long as you live within the sandbox and the control that you have, and you've picked the cloud service that you like, you're living under something that hundreds, if not thousands, of other customers are doing exactly the same thing. Said also slightly differently, should one of those boxes breaks, it's going to break for everybody. And guess who's going to scream? Not just you, but every customer of that service, and Microsoft will have probably heard that loud and clear and are going to be extremely active to go fix it, ideally before you even see it. Now, done in the right way, you can reduce your server count but still have high availability. If you follow Microsoft's guidances, you can have a 99.9% available uptime of all of your infrastructure and applications just by doing the right configuration. So while it costs you less, you got there faster, you still have your SLA of availability, you just have to do things the cloud way. Last but not least, security. This is one of my favorite topics. Is the cloud secure? You bet it is. And we'll cover off on that here in a little bit. But to say more specifically, if you think about the number of customers that Microsoft has in those 28 regions across all of those servers and every data farm that they have, security is the number one thing that Microsoft is worried about. They have to keep everything isolated. They can't allow one customer to see another customer. They need to protect the data. They need to protect the infrastructure. Their entire livelihood is based on security and audit and compliance. I haven't seen another cloud provider that spends the amount of money and the amount of time ensuring their credentials, their certifications, their compliance audits have been done to the same scale that Microsoft has. Said also differently, they know about viruses and ransomware 9 times out of 10 before anybody else does. They get notifications by competitors like Google and AWS and try to get out in front of it before it hits. They also get notified by the NSA and our friends in the government who say, alert, this is coming, you might want to do something about it. Cool, we will. And when they make that change, they're not just benefiting themselves, they're benefiting every single one of their customers that's leveraging it. Now, having that been said, I said a little bit at the top of the call that there is this thing called commercial versus government cloud, and really what is the difference? Well, at the underpinnings inside of the core of the system, they are the same thing. They're both cloud technologies. It's both Azure. It's done exactly the same way. The difference is who the intended audience is for it. Commercial cloud was intended exactly the way it sounds, commercially, for any customer, for any reason that's willing to swipe a credit card and go buy cloud. The government cloud, on the other hand, is really intended for government entities, public services, and public sector. This is where government is really oftentimes focused on private and internal and locked down and only for government usages, whereas the commercial is available for the public. It's intended to be on the internet. It's intended to be commercially available. The commercial cloud allows multi-tenancy with any customer from any industry. So what that means is you're going to have folks that are there in financial services, in retail, in media, in high tech, all living and playing together in the same cloud, in the same environments. Whereas in the government cloud, this is multi-tenancy, but only for government entities. So that means you can be readily assured that the federal government who's using Azure Services, they have the same technology and capability available to state and local agencies. Or said differently, a local agency is going to get the benefits that the feds require, but that's all the customers that you're going to see in there are going to be government entities. So it really kind of gives you a much more sovereign look or sovereign data center type of approach. Speaking of data sovereignty, what does that mean for data storage? Well, in the commercial cloud, data storage is controlled, but it can also be located in other geographies. So depending upon the way you configure it, your data can be stored here in the US in a specific data center, or it can be stored outside the US in a different country. You have the control, you choose, you pick where your data is stored and how it's accessed. But in the government cloud, it's a sovereign data cloud. It means that your data is in region, in country only. So if you're using the US cloud, you're in the US. Your data doesn't leave the US. If you're in the Germany cloud, it stays in Germany. It never gets to go outside of there. Security and compliance in the government cloud is really done on an accreditation basis, and it's specifically focused on government clearance, country protection and isolation, and government credentials. So Department of Defense, your security clearances from a SOC 1, SOC 2 perspective are really targeted towards military, DoD, federal regulations, FedRAMP, things like that. Whereas in the commercial space, it's really focused on commercial security accreditation. So think financial services, think SOC and ISO compliance, specifically around repeatability and processes and security from that standpoint. In the commercial cloud, all of the Azure services are available across all three tiers, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. They interoperate very effectively, and this is where most of the development effort is being spent on all sides of both Microsoft and the partner network. Whereas in the government cloud, almost everything is ready. Almost everything is in the government cloud, but not everything. Some services really just aren't intended for the government. They're really intended for the general public, and it doesn't make sense for the government cloud to host them. So there's a lot more that you can find online about this, both on the Microsoft website and in blogs, where there's a pretty detailed listing of what services are available for the government cloud versus the commercial cloud, and I encourage you to take advantage of those Microsoft resources. I want to spend a little time talking about Azure Subscriptions because pricing and charging and costs of the cloud is something that's forefront in everybody's mind. Is the cloud cheaper? Is the cloud more expensive? How does it work? Oh my gosh, this is just so much data. Well, Azure and all cloud providers, quite frankly, are all about what's called consumption. The analogy of your utility bill and the power meter just spinning in the background is exactly the way that you should think about the cloud. Pricing is defined at the cloud service. So which cloud service are you using? Are you using a virtual machine? Are you doing Office 365 or Dynamics 365? What type of service you're using, because you're paying for it by that cloud service, and the unit of calculation is by that cloud service. Each one of the 500 plus services that are in Azure have a slightly different way that consumption and pricing is calculated. So you need to pay attention to which service you want and what that price rate is by that unit. It could be based on size, location, the number that you used, either a head count or a seat license, or a number of CPUs, or a number of disks. It really just depends. Some are based on usage. In other words, how much time has it been running? Others are based on the number of users you have. So paying attention to what that unit is important. Also, Azure is priced on two different pricing models, one that's called on-demand and one that's called reserved. And what that really means is on-demand pricing is done on a monthly basis where your pricing was calculated at the unit that was for that month and for however much time you were using it or however many of those you were done. In other words, the pricing is calculated for you pay for what you consumed. Drink your own champagne, if you will. Whereas reserve pricing is when you say to Microsoft, I plan on running these 5 VMs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the full year. Can you cut me a discount? Well, it's not really a discount, but it's a reserved price. You lock in at a price rate for that commitment, typically at minimum a year, can go longer, where you lock in at a reserved price and it runs at that reserved price over the duration of that commitment. Reserve pricing is really, really good when you know you're going to be using it consistently and you're not going to have variation. On-demand pricing, on the other hand, is better when you know your amount of usage is going to go up and down. Pros and cons being on-demand pricing can change. Reserve pricing gets you locked at a rate. Everything is done on enterprise agreements. So, people always ask me, how can I get a discount? Well, do you have an enterprise agreement? We do as AKA, but you might as well as being one of our customers. And those kinds of discounts are typically applied per cloud service. So, if you bought a lot of Azure and you worked with Microsoft to kind of define what your strategy was, they may give you a discount for, say, virtual machines because you're using a lot of them. And if Microsoft was gracious enough to do that, it'll be done on that cloud service. These are one of those kinds of things where you need to really partner with Microsoft well, keep them actively informed of what you're planning on doing and why you're doing it, and partner up with them, negotiate, and have a good conversation. So that way it's mutually beneficial to both of you. The last thing to kind of note is AKA can't necessarily give you a better price than what you can get from Microsoft. Everything it really just depends on what kind of relationship you have and how much Azure you're using. So in a lot of situations, my customers can get better pricing than what AKA can. Other situations, AKA can give you better pricing than you can get on your own. You really just need to have a conversation with us, with Microsoft, and really kind of partner up with everybody and have a good discussion on what your goals are. But said simply, it's a utility bill. That's the difference with Azure. So instead of having a massive capital expenditure that you do once every 3 years, you have an operating expense that you're going to have to pay for on a monthly basis. Azure is done with account subscriptions and resources, so everybody has to have an Azure account. They're typically called enterprise accounts. That billing account is how Microsoft knows who you are. Once you've got yourself an account, you have to have a subscription. There is a tremendous number of subscriptions. There's a subscription for Office 365, and a subscription for Dynamics 365, a subscription for base Azure. Each one of these types of subscriptions has a different profile of services that are associated with it, and it's one of those things where you have to have a discussion with Microsoft about what type of cloud services you want, and they'll give you that subscription. But on the other hand, this is how billing works. So every one of us, all the way down to the lowest developer, has some form of a subscription that we see an invoice for. So if I, as a developer, am using my MSDN subscription and I've incurred $175 worth of Azure compute, I can look at my invoice and see what was that $175 spent on: storage, compute time, certificates, virtual networks, egress and entrance charges, things like, exit charges. Really kind of depends, and the bill is broken down by subscription. Inside of subscriptions, you have resource groups, and your cloud services are allocated internally. So you have to look at sort of the way that subscription was provisioned and where you're deploying things. Are you deploying things in East US, West US, in Germany, in Asia? Where exactly are you deploying stuff? Pricing is complicated. Don't try to do this on your own. There's a calculator out on Azure that you can leverage that'll give you some good feelings, but honestly, partner up with Microsoft or partner up with AKA. We really definitely understand how the pricing works, and we'll help guide you on the right way to solution and design your capability and what you're trying to get it covered, and help you understand what is the price ramifications of those decisions. So while you may be located in New York City, which data center should you use? Should you use East US or East US 2? Which cloud service should you use? Which one makes more sense? Should you do on-demand pricing or reserve pricing? Are you planning on using this for 10 months and 2 months it's going to be offline? Does it make sense to pay the reserve pricing and flatten it out even if you're not using it for those 2 months versus doing the on-demand pricing and take a risk of the price going up? All of those types of decisions really come into play. But the number one thing that I advise all of my customers and all of my architects is you can't price this without a reference architecture. You need to have had designed your solution. You can't just go out to Azure and start clicking buttons and think you're going to get predictability. You really need to have a design that you understand. Again, consumption is calculated per unit. So, you have to kind of know what kind of cloud service you're using. So if you're using Dynamics 365, you're invoiced by your subscription, and your unit of calculation is per user per month. So, I'm going to use Dynamics 365 for the next 12 months, and I have 30 people. What's my price? Boom, boom, boom. There you go. That's what you're going to be paying for. Virtual machines, on the other hand, are a unit of calculation of which virtual machine SKU did you pick. Did you pick a D13 V2? Did you do on-demand pricing, or did you do reserve pricing. Are we going to do it by time, or are we going to do it by unit? Those types of things come into a calculation when it comes to virtual machines. Storage, it would be lovely just to assume that you just pay per gigabyte, but it's more than that. Which type of storage are you using? Are you using standard or premium storage? Are you doing locally redundant or regionally redundant? A lot of these terms may be fairly fresh to you, and I wouldn't expect everybody to know what all of that means. We'll have further webinars in the future where we'll kind of go into a little bit more cloud specifics, or you can look up some of those resources like I mentioned at the top of the webinar from Microsoft to talk through what these types of capabilities. Point is, there's over 500 services. Each one has a different unit. So partner with Microsoft or partner with AKA, and we can help you understand how this all works. Invoicing is done at the enterprise account level. So you're going to have an account, and each account's going to have a subscription, and you're going to get your invoice down to those subscriptions. So you'll see, what your resource usage was, what the pricing was at that subscription level. If you want to know deeper than the subscription, you got to either write your own software to go against the APIs of Azure or pull a third-party tool. At the time of this article, invoicing and the breakdown stops at the subscription level, and you have to do some custom work to get lower than that. So if you want to know how much am I paying per VM, that data is definitely available. It's just not surfaced as part of your invoice. So you'll have to look at either a third-party tool or write your own against the APIs or leverage AKA. We have pre-built IP that we have that we can bring to bear for you that will help you understand some of those lower level charges. MSD and subscriptions. This is a hot topic I typically try to help people understand very early on. Microsoft Developer Network. That's what MSDN stands for. This is specifically intended for developers and engineers that are doing things on a per individual basis. There's a larger footprint of MSDN. Feel free to go look it up on Bing, msdn.microsoft.com. But one of the benefits that come from an MSD subscription is an Azure subscription. So in other words, if you have an MSDN subscription, you have a certain amount of Azure compute time per individual that comes along with that that's intended for your developers to leverage for doing project work, self-study, education, training, certification. I really encourage everybody to take a look at MSDN subscriptions because that's really intended to help you break down your developer costs separate from your production or your environmental costs. So that was the overview I wanted to give. I know that there's so many questions out there. I didn't want to be too exhaustive on how deep I went with this. Please feel free to ask questions into the chat window or shoot me an email. It's ginks@akaes.com or contact AKA. Shoot them a note and say, hey, I've got questions about Azure or cloud services. Can you reach out to the cloud team? I really want to know about X, and we'd be happy to help. So I'm going to ask if anybody has a question, if you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can ask in the chat window, and I'll read the question off and try my best to answer. Looks like we have some questions coming in via the chat window. Let's give it a second. Why Azure over other services such as AWS? That is a great question. I'm going to avoid the philosophical technology wars of bias. There are certainly those people out there that are AWS fans and believe wholeheartedly, almost to a developer religious fervor, that AWS is the way to go, and Microsoft has the same across Microsoft folks. There are some strong benefits and differences between the two products. I would say that gap is narrowing. Traditionally, most individuals would think of AWS as the service that does better virtual machine hosting. AWS started off with their product doing virtual machines and trying to scale things out from an infrastructure play. Some would argue even before Microsoft, although that timing can be debated a little bit, but their strong point was bore out of infrastructure. So they were really trying to solve for the building up of Amazon.com. They needed to solve this for themselves and build a solution that could host their e-commerce product and build Amazon.com, and that grew from there as they started to solve that problem for from themselves. They started bringing in, selling that to customers, and grew that infrastructure footprint just organically based on the way their business model was. Microsoft, on the other hand, is a software company. Always has been, always will be, although they're moving into more of a cloud software company, but at the end of the day, they write software. Microsoft's solution was really born in the platform as a service space. Heavy emphasis on developers, heavy emphasis on providing development services that allow a developer to pull, I want one of these 15 different services to make up my website, and I don't want to have to build it myself. So, they really designed it from more of a developer-centric point of view and started off with platform as a service as their primary play. I'd say feature for feature today, there is a lot of similarity by both platforms and both technology stacks. You can leverage things like containers to bring in open source platform as a service products into both platforms and host them in those containers and still have one developer service running in either AWS or Azure. There's obviously pricing differences. There's obviously investment in technology differences, but I'd say today they're really feature for feature on par with one another. You'll find some services that AWS offers that Microsoft doesn't yet, and others that Microsoft has that AWS doesn't have for now. It just really depends on what your viewpoint is. Good question, though. What are the benefits of reaching out to AKA and not just Microsoft? That's a good question. I love Microsoft. I've done work with Microsoft for the better part of 20 years. So this is not meant to degrade Microsoft's capability. Quite the opposite. I think it's more about where strengths lie. So Microsoft is really focused on helping customers achieve more through their products and looking at ways that are very core and centric to the technology and the capabilities that they built. AKA is very focused on our business collaborative experience, really building solutions that are industry specific for the challenges of the industry that our customers are in. So, said differently, when we talk about financial services, or even more specifically wealth management in FinServ, our capabilities and our core strengths over the last 25 years have been around understanding those business models and really getting the pains and challenges associated with it. Our own IP has been built around solving for industry problems that, quite frankly, don't exist inside of Microsoft software. And who would blame Microsoft for writing or for not writing solutions to a very niche-focused industry vertical when they're trying to write more of a ubiquitous solution across the board? So I think when you talk about I have a problem and a challenge that's very industry specific to my needs in my company and the way that we go to business, AK is going to give you a very tailored solution for your need and bring our intellectual property to bear to help you understand and solve for your problem in your space. But if you're just trying to figure out what's the best virtual machine to go after, Microsoft can help you just as easily as AKA can. So it just comes down to what types of challenges you have and who do you have the better relationship with. We partner together very much. Microsoft and AKA typically go to market together. So if you decide to talk to one versus the other, don't worry. There's no competition between the two of us. We're tightly locked partners, and we try to go to market together. It's a good question. We have time for a couple more if there's any more out there. All right, excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody for your time and participation today. I hope you found this enjoyable and educational. Like I said, should you have follow-up questions or want to look for a more tailored discussion around Azure or what the cloud can do for you and your company, again, please feel free to contact me. This is Greg Inks. My email address is ginks@akaes.com, or you can find us on our website, akaes.com. Go to the Contact Us page. Submit your information or your request, and we'll make sure that somebody connects with you very quickly. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you very much for attending. Bye-bye.